Welcome to Redacted at 3 a.m. If you've been following this series, then you already know some things are not meant to stay recorded, and some things don't stay gone. This is the second file, the second account, and what happened after that night in B17 did not stop when I left the room. It followed, quietly, patiently. The first time I heard it, I thought it came from inside my head. Not a voice exactly, just my name, spoken softly like someone testing if I would respond. I didn't. I told myself it was exhaustion. The kind that settles in after too many late shifts, too many hours spent reading documents that weren't meant to be read twice. I hadn't gone back to room B17 since that night. I made sure of it. My assignments kept me in other sections of the building and I didn't question it. In fact, I preferred it. The routine had returned. Boxes, files, quiet hours, and predictable silence. At least that's what I told myself. But something had changed. Not in the building. In the way I noticed things. Silence wasn't just silence anymore. It had layers, depth, expectation. The system never mentioned B17 again. No new entries, no logs, no references. It was as if the room had been removed from the building without physically disappearing, and I let that happen. I didn't ask questions. I didn't search for the folder that vanished from my desk. I kept my head down and worked. For a few nights, everything felt normal. Then the calls started, not phone calls. Not exactly. The building had an internal paging system. It was old, rarely used, and most of the speakers had long since stopped working. When announcements were made, they were usually distorted, barely understandable. But what I heard wasn't an announcement. It came from the hallway, close enough to recognize my name, just once, spoken clearly. I stopped what I was doing and listened. Nothing followed. No footsteps, no movement, no second call. I stepped out into the hallway. It was empty. The lights hummed quietly overhead. I walked a few steps in each direction, expecting to see some another employee, maybe, but there was no one. The building felt the same as always, still, unremarkable. But as I stood there, I realized something else. Sound hadn't echoed. In a hallway like that, it should have. Even a whisper should have carried. But my name had sounded contained, localized, as if it had been spoken right next to my ear. I went back inside slowly, closed the door. And for the first time since I started working there, I locked it. The next night it happened again. Same time. Just before 3:00 a.m. I was in a different room, C12, this time sorting through maintenance logs. The voice came from behind me, closer than before. My name spoken a little more clearly. I turned immediately. No one. The door was closed. I hadn't heard it open. I walked over and pulled it open quickly. The hallway stretched out in both directions. Empty. Still. But this time, something else was different. The lights. They weren't flickering. They were dimmer. Subtly. Like something had lowered the brightness just enough to be noticed. I stepped out. The air felt cooler. Heavier. I walked a few steps, then stopped. I had the distinct feeling that if I went any further, I wouldn't be alone. I returned to the room, closed the door, locked it again. When I turned back toward the table, something felt wrong. Not obvious, not dramatic, just placed. The papers I had been reviewing were no longer in the same order. Not drastically, just enough that I noticed. One page that had been on top was now halfway through the stack. Another had been turned slightly. I tried to remember if I had done that. Maybe I had. But something didn't feel right. I checked the time. 2:59 a.m. And that's when the speaker above me clicked. Not loudly, just enough to register. Then my name. Clear, undistorted, closer than anything I had heard before. I didn't move. I didn't respond. But the silence that followed felt expectant, like something was waiting for confirmation. I stepped onto the chair and reached up, inspecting the speaker. It looked the same. Oh, disconnected. But as I stood there, I noticed something I hadn't before. There was a faint vibration, barely noticeable, like something was active inside it. I leaned closer, and that's when I heard it. Another voice, quieter, further away. Not calling my name, just speaking. I couldn't make out the words. They overlapped, as if multiple recordings were playing at once. I climbed down slowly. The room felt smaller now, more contained. I stepped back toward the door, and then my name. Again. But this time it didn't come from the speaker. It came from inside the room. Behind me. I turned quickly. Nothing. But the chair across the table had moved, just a few inches, slightly angled. Facing me, I was certain it hadn't been like that before. I hadn't gone near it. I hadn't touched it, and yet it wasn't where it had been. I stepped back. My hand reached for the door. But before I could open it, the speaker clicked again, and this time, it didn't say my name. It said something else. You left. The words were calm, neutral, like a statement, not a question. I felt a chill move through me. You were not cleared. I didn't understand. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't taken anything, Ellie. Not intentionally, the voice continued. You returned. My grip tightened on the door handle. I hadn't returned to B-17, I was sure of that. And yet you were acknowledged. The room felt wrong, not just unsettling. Incorrect. Like I was standing in a place that didn't match its own records. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. This time I didn't hesitate. The hallway lights flickered once as I stepped out, then steadied. I started walking, fast, not running, just moving, putting distance between myself and that room. Halfway down the hall I stopped. There was something on the wall. A panel, slightly open. I hadn't noticed it before. I approached slowly, pushed it open. Inside was a narrow compartment. This time, it wasn't empty. There were multiple strips of paper, stacked, folded. Unfolded it. Repeat after acknowledgement. The same message. I took another. You responded. Another. Presence confirmed. My hands felt cold. I dropped the papers back into the compartment, closed the panel, stepped back, and that's when I noticed something else. Further down the hallway. A door. I had never seen it before. I knew this hallway. I had walked it dozens of times. That door had never been there. I stood still, watching it, waiting for it to disappear. It didn't. Slowly, each step heavier than the last. The air grew quieter. Not still, just muted, like the building itself was holding something back. I reached the door, pushed it open slightly. Inside was a room, identical to B-17. Same shelves, same table, same chair. But the shelves weren't full. Most of them were empty, except for one section. A gap, perfectly clean. Exactly like the one I had seen before. I didn't step inside. I didn't need to. I already knew this wasn't a different room. It was the same one, or something connected to it. I stepped back, closed the door slowly, and when I looked again, it was gone. The wall was empty, flat, unbroken, like it had never existed. I didn't go back to C-12. I went straight to the main office, sat down at my desk, opened the system. My hands were steady, but my thoughts weren't. I searched for B-17. No results. I searched for C-12. Normal, no anomalies. Then I searched for my own access logs. There was a new entry. Time stamped at 3:06 a.m. No room number, no clearance, just a status. Engaged. I stared at it, then scrolled down. There was a note attached, short, simple. Subject responded without verbal confirmation. I felt something shift in my understanding. I hadn't spoken. I hadn't answered. But something had still recorded a response. I refreshed the page. The entry disappeared, just like before. I leaned back slowly. The building was quiet again. Product table. But I knew that wasn't true. Because now, it wasn't just calling my name, it was documenting me, tracking, confirming, recording things I didn't remember doing. And when I checked the system one last time before leaving, there was a new section, hidden, restricted, no title, just a list. More than before, some I didn't recognize, some partially redacted. Mine was still there, at the bottom, and next to it, a status I hadn't seen before, active. I tried to open the list, but before it loaded, the entire section disappeared. Not deleted, not removed, just accessible, as if something had decided I had already seen enough. And as I shut down the system, I noticed one final thing. In the reflection of the screen behind me, for just a second, someone was standing there, close enough to read what I was reading. And by the time I turned around, there was nothing. But when I looked back at the monitor, a single line had appeared. One I know wasn't there before. We heard you. If this continues, then whatever is inside that building isn't just calling names anymore. It's learning them. And in the next file, something doesn't wait to be acknowledged. It calls first, and it doesn't stop.